Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure you are all aware of the upcoming river trip that I announced that I'm doing with the Free Flow Institute. It's going to happen this summer, August 15th through 20th, and it's going to be on Oregon's wild and scenic Rogue River. This will be my second time teaching a free flow course, and I couldn't be more excited. Last year's adventure down the Green River was one of the most rewarding experiences of my career, and I'm still thinking about it every day. And this summer's course will once again focus on purpose-driven storytelling. Specifically, in today's crowded, manic media landscape, how do you tell stories that connect with people, affect change, and make the world a better place? Over the course of my winding and weird and crazy career, I've managed to accumulate a deep, diverse bank of knowledge related to the power of positive storytelling. Some was gleaned through my podcast conversations with the West's most legendary writers, creatives, conservationists, and thought leaders. And I learned some of it from books, mentors, and formal study. But the vast majority of it was accumulated through nearly 15 years of hard-won experience, experimentation, and lots of trial and error. So during our 5 days on the river, I'll be teaching you everything I know about building a life as a purpose-driven storyteller. Lessons learned from my career in Western land, water, and conservation, as well as my unexpected journey of transforming mountain and prairie from a little side project into my full-time job. I'll be sharing a blend of big picture ideas and specific hard skills that I've developed over the years, which are strategies, practices, and tactics that have helped me tell stories that affect change. I'll take us from the 10,000-foot view of the craft and philosophy of narrative storytelling down to the 10-foot view of the software, gear, financial realities, and specific resources that you'll need to get your project off the ground. You can follow the link in the episode notes to learn more, or go to freeflowinstitute.com and look for my course. And there's early bird pricing from now until January 31st. So if you want to take advantage of that, I would encourage you to go ahead and get your application in as soon as you can. Thanks so much. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Chad Ellis. Chad is the CEO of the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, also known as TALT, which is one of the nation's leading ag-focused conservation organizations. TALT's mission is to conserve the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. But at its core, TALT's work is built on the foundation of long-term, trusting, mutually respectful relationships. Given the small proportion of public lands in Texas compared to other western states, much of the responsibility for landscape-scale ecological health falls on the shoulders of private landowners. And since 2007, TALT has helped these landowners find ways to not only protect their family legacies, but to improve the overall quality of grasslands, water, air, and wildlife for all Texans. Chad was raised in rural Texas, and from a very early age, he felt a deep connection to land, agriculture, and wildlife. While his entire career has been devoted to thoughtfully and effectively stewarding natural resources, you'll quickly realize that at his core, Chad is a relationship builder. During his tenures at the NRCS, the Mobil Research Institute, and now as the leader of TALT, Chad has implemented many cutting-edge conservation solutions. But as you'll hear him explain, none of these projects would be successful without solid, trusting relationships between all stakeholders. Longtime listeners will recognize Chad from an earlier appearance on Mountain and Prairie. Back in 2023, he was one of the panelists in an episode called Landscape Scale Management in a Private Land State, which was recorded live at the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society's annual meeting. In this episode, we dig more into Chad's personal and professional journey in conservation, why he's devoted his career to such a challenging yet critical cause, and how he approaches his work from both practical and philosophical perspectives. We talk about his love of entrepreneurial approaches, his leadership style, his mentors, the storied legacy of TALT's founder Blair Fitzsimons, supporting the next generation of conservationists, his favorite books, and much more. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to check out TALT's website and follow its work on social media. I've got links to all of that in the episode notes. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Chad, I've been seeing you all over Texas many, many times. And before I actually met you in person, I knew a lot about you from Eric Glenn. And now here we are.
Don't believe a damn thing.
He's a sketchy character, as we both know.
Yeah.
Now we're here in Eric Glenn's office. We barged in, turned it our personal recording studio, and I'm really glad to get to chat with you because even though we've talked a lot and I met you and I know a lot about you, I don't know all the details. So I'm going to turn up the heat in here real hot, make it real uncomfortable. Yeah. But I just start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up? I know you grew up right, like almost in the dead center of Texas,
that is
right?
Exactly right. Yeah. If you looked at a map of Texas and put right in the dead center, it's pretty close to where I grew up. Okay. Lone, Texas, north of Brady, northern part of McCulloch County. And I would say it's a small farming, ranching community. I graduated with the class of 4.
Did you really?
Class of 4. So I know I can see the wheels turning ahead. And yes, I was the top 25% of the class. And that's, so if you think about the DNA of myself, that's where I'm grounded, right? I mean, the part of me is really about the land stewards and trying to help empower them, and growing up in, that community and seeing the struggles and trying to see how, families are trying to keep it together and get it to the next generation. I grew up seeing that, and that was part of me. And that's, you kind of fast forward to today of being at Texas Ag Land Trust. And that's our goal, is how do we empower producers to be better tomorrow than they are today? So it's awesome. That's awesome.
Now, did you grow up on a working operation, or what? I mean, obviously the community that was centered around it. What was it like?
Really our town has like one stop sign, it's a school, a little bitty post office, and a tabernacle. And that's town. Yeah. There's no stores, nothing. We're about 20 miles to the closest town, Brady. And, from a larger town would be San Angelo, about 65 miles east of there. So, I mean, everybody, majority of the community is, on the land, some form or fashion, or school teacher, or, combination of that. So I grew up we actually leased a house from a working ranch, the Walker Ranch, and we lived on that place. My mom was a school teacher.
Okay.
Taught school there at Lone. And my dad is kind of a business side. And so he worked in a town about 45 miles from there. He ran the business incubator.
Oh, cool.
And kind of helped the rural businesses kind of get together, and they'd have, up to 15 companies in there, and he'd help them get started and kind of doing that side. So, you think about mine today, right? That had a lot of influence with me, of my father, of thinking that business side. And I'm very entrepreneurial mindset, and I've had some pleasures over the years of, working with PERC, Property Environment Research Center.
I've had them on the podcast. Yeah.
So, I'm actually an envirepreneur.
I saw that on your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What was your project? First of all, explain what that was.
Yeah. So Property Environment Research Center is really looking at free market approaches to environmental issues. And they had a program that basically you would bring a project in, and that you would work with a bunch of folks that's tied to PERC, a lot of professors out of Montana State and Clemson and just other, successful kind of entrepreneurs, and kind of walk through and kind of learn a lot of the aspects. And so it was a great program. I really enjoyed a lot. Kind of the project I took forward was a project that was very passionate to me. It was really about a private land stewardship center, really kind of focused. At that time I was working at Mobil Foundation, Mobil Research Institute. And we had I started partnering with Dr. Roel Lopez at Texas A&M with Natural Resource Institute. And he and I were kind of talking like, man, we really need this private land stewardship center to really kind of focus about, the benefits of private land stewardship to those public benefits, but also think about from the education, the policy side, the kind of free market approaches. And we started kind of putting that center together. And so that was really my project, bringing forward. And so, I think what was great is I built a relationship with PERC during that time. Is, you think about, a lot of their work was on public lands, right? And so they'd done a little bit on private lands. And, my project kind of really spurred, I think, them to really start looking at private lands, and that, hey, we need to be focusing on this area, and how do they, this private private-public, benefits in a lot of areas. And so you kind of fast forward to today, they started kind of a new little effort, on private land stewardship, and, Brian Yablonsky coming in, he's very focused and a lot of background on that private land stewardship. So still work with them today, kind of thinking on a lot of these approaches and things. And we did a lot of work, probably, for over 10 years with them on the private land side.
All right. So one thing I've always admired about you and your approach is that entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
But I want to hear how you got there, because I know when you went to school, did you study wildlife biology?
Yeah,
and then you were at the NRCS for a while. And so in some ways...
I have kind of an interesting background, right? And flow. And so I graduated, right, from Lone, went to actually Sul Ross State University, kind of far west Texas, kind of Big Bend area. Got a wildlife degree there, undergrad.
And why was that? I mean, just loving being outdoors?
That was my passion, right, is the land. And actually I one of my biggest passions is hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
So my mind when I went to school was I'm going to be a game warden.
Oh, okay.
My first semester took a wildlife law, and it was a game warden that taught it. It was a great class. And it was kind of this aha moment of, man, how am I going to hunt and fish? Well, that's a busy time and, working. I'm like, I can't do this. Uh-huh. So I kind of shifted, right? And kind of went to the biology side and that. And so kind of interesting. I started working for Texas Parks and Wildlife and,
oh, nice.
And kind of did that for just a short bit and really kind of got frustrated, to be honest, of a lot of, background from the biologists were really about the critter. They weren't, really didn't understand the habitat and really the land steward and their important role and managing those lands. And so I was like, I just got to go. I decided to go back to school and went to Angelo State, got my master's in animal science and range management. And really, because I wanted to be not a wildlife biologist, I wanted to be a conservationist. Sure. I wanted to understand, all of the components. And so I did that and finished up school there and then started working for NRCS. Mm-hmm. Started off in San Angelo and then went to, as a district conservationist in Brackettville, kind of on the border. And
so, what would you do? What was your specific job there?
So I started off as a range conservationist, just working with landowners in 3-county area, really helping them, doing plans, conservation plans, prescribed grazing plans, understand, prescribed fire, writing those plans, just kind of really helping them on that technical side. Really enjoyed that. Then I went as a district conservationist, where kind of in charge of that county, working in that one county, those landowners, thinking of the programs and all of that kind of, going out. Went to far west Texas, back to Alpine, and kind of was a supervisor out there. And that's the thing about, natural resource conservation services, you have a lot of options and you can move, different positions for different things. And I kind of really felt like I wanted to get more on the technical side. So crazy enough, I ended up taking a position with NRCS as the state range conservationist of Florida.
Oh, did you really?
And so I moved from the Chihuahuan Desert of 9-inch rainfall to Florida in July.
What part?
The state office was in Gainesville, so it's in North Central, but I worked the whole state.
Oh, wow.
That was absolutely the craziest idea, but actually the best thing I ever did in my career is I thought, man, I really understand this range management. I'm, pretty good at it. And then I went to Florida and it was like upside down, right?
Yeah.
But all the principles are the same, right? The ecology is ecology, and really gained a lot of challenges in Florida, to be honest. University of Florida is the ag school. In 1985, University of Florida stopped their range management program. And so what happened was in Florida was, everybody went to UF or Auburn or, something of that nature, but it was really only animal science, or it was agronomy. So they understood, kind of that part, but understanding really the management side and the ecology and that stuff was missing, not only from the staff of NRCS or Extension, but also the ranching community and farming community is just kind of the background of that. And so it brought a lot of challenges, which was a lot of growth for me of, going and traveling all over the state and kind of talking about these principles and how to do it and learn a way too of, not having that Texas persona, right?
Yeah.
If you're not from here, what do you know? Right. And trying to be able to gain some of those skills was a true blessing. Was there about almost 4 years, learned a lot. And I'll say I learned so much from that aspect, but I would say the producers, the ranchers in Florida are very progressive in a lot of ways, right? And especially the business side, right? And that kind of comes back to my entrepreneurial mindset, is that every one of those operations have many facets, right? They're not just cattle, they're citrus, they're turf. There's a lot of enterprises, right? And so I learned so much from them and the way they thought on their management of that aspect. And so I really took that to heart in a lot of ways, and it really molded me for the rest of my career and where I am today. From that, ended up moving back to Texas from Florida, was at the National Central Technology Support Center for NRCS.
Okay.
So at that point, I worked from North Dakota to Michigan, down to Louisiana, Texas.
And so what was it? I mean, it seems like you kept going up the ranks.
Yeah.
Was that, what did they see in you or your superiors, or what do you feel like you had? I know it's always when I ask humble people this stuff. I mean, was it your ability to build relationships, the technical stuff, like a combo of all of it? What do you think made you so successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I have anything different than anybody else, right? It's just, I remember a mentor of mine saying that, if you put in for a position when you think you're ready, you're already too late.
So you pushed
and so I pushed, right? And pushed out of my comfort zone and tried to, constantly, I'm a life learner, trying to learn as much as I can and better myself, right? Each and every day. And so I think some of those aspects really help.
You also work extremely hard.
Exactly. I was going to say, work ethic is probably that, right? And that's coming back from where I grew up and seeing everybody I grew up with, from a farming ranching community. And so, even when I worked for the government, I was working 70 hours a week, which is kind of unheard of, in that aspect there. When I was working at the tech center, I enjoyed it, and probably the best job in the agency by far.
Really?
Just getting to work with different people, different ranches. I've been truly blessed to be on some of the best ranches across this nation. And just, it's amazing when you sit back and really think about the opportunities, and I don't take it for granted. I really appreciate it. But I had an aha moment, Ed, is I was traveling every week, flying out of DFW airport somewhere. And one morning, I didn't even remember where I was going. I pulled up at a remote parking spot, and a lady came out of a booth and, "Hey, Mr. Ellis, how you doing? Here's a bottle of water, your newspaper, go park on, aisle D." She got back in the booth and the arm raised up, and I started driving through, and it was just like, oh shit, how the hell does this lady know my name? And it was just kind of this, it was really it was just a shock, right? And my kids were really young at the time, and I'm like, man, I'm seeing this lady more than my kids and wife, and I got to do something, even though job and everything was great. And so at that point, I started kind of soul searching in a lot of ways, right? Of, where can I take my skill set, or do I stay with the agency? What do I do? Where's that? Or, what's the future look like? And I was kind of at a unique situation where I had, about 12 years in with USDA, and I needed to either stay in, from a career wise, or it was time for me to make that move. Mobil Foundation was a position came open as a range conservationist there, consultant.
And tell about the Mobil Foundation.
Yeah, so Mobil Foundation, it's over 75 years, really there provided by Lloyd Noble, who was a successful oil and gas businessman that kind of put the foundation to help the farmers and ranchers out of Ardmore, Oklahoma, kind of in his hometown, stay in business. And it really think about, he had a really, just interesting. We could have a whole series just talking about Lloyd and the forethoughts. In the 30s, he had oil and gas sites from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So he became very passionate in aviation.
Oh, yeah.
Flying, right? So he
a lot of those big shots, like Sam Walton was
exactly.
the same way.
Yeah. And what's amazing, right? You think about in the 30s, he was flying site to site we didn't have the airports. We didn't have, I mean, it was military, right? We're the only ones. So he had a very unique bird's eye view of what was happening to the landscape.
Oh, I got it.
Right? So the Dust Bowl, right? So it came in, he started seeing the Dust Bowl. He started coming back home, seeing people pack up and leaving, trying to find other jobs. And he's like, man, what's going on? And so it's kind of interesting. You had a guy that was really thinking of the future, that made his money in oil and gas, but then built this foundation to help landowners to how to find better, sustainable practices, how to, all of that aspect. And he kind of fast forward, when I was there, we were the largest independent ag research facility in the nation. We had at that time, when I was there, over 400 employees, over 150 PhD scientists.
Wow.
It's just a very, and so it was really amazing, right? The impact we were able to do. I went there to be a range consultant, never really ended up doing that job. Ended up kind of being the CEO, Bill Buckner, who's a great mentor of mine, kind of right hand. And, Bill and I, had a lot of mindsets, and I learned a lot from Bill of, how can we take the assets we have and how do we make an impact? How do we help really empower these land stewards?
Had you been thinking along those lines at the NRCS? I mean, was that, because that seems like a new way of thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, was it almost when the CEO kind of tapped you to help him along with that, was it a surprise to you, or was it, I mean, obviously you like a challenge, but that seems like kind of a big step.
Yeah. I think the first thing is it was interesting. Bill had been the CEO about 6 months before I got there.
Okay. And
that's really how they drew me. They sent me a DVD of Bill first kind of talk to all staff. And I watched that video of Bill speaking, and it was the first time I've ever heard anybody articulate where they wanted to take an organization that fit 100% to my internal mission and vision.
And how would you talk about your internal vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think, how do we find new approaches and innovations of getting land stewardship and conservation on the ground, right? I think we all fall in this aspect of just keep doing the same old, and it works, right? And in the dynamics of life, there's always constant changes. We can't just keep things, right? And so complacency kills, right, in businesses. And I think that's kind of where I felt, a lot of situations. And so it was just a way he articulated it and his approach to things. His background's pretty interesting. He was Bayer Crop Sciences CEO.
Oh, really?
So he grew up, right, as a for-profit company. So he brought a for-profit mindset to a non-profit world and really pushed the envelope. And I've taken a lot of that approach of even how we run TALT is, and this is, I would say this is my philosophy, right? Coming down to it. And a lot of people probably sometimes, take a step back of this, but this is, I think, really important is, I approach TALT is we're in the relation business first, conservation business second. And a lot of folks, right, in the conservation world is like, well, that you can't do that, right? But, especially when we're talking about perpetual easements, forever, perpetual is a damn long time.
Yeah, it is.
And so it's all about trust and relationship and family.
That's it.
And so what I try to do is, right, we build a business where the core is around people and family. And so that's what's made us successful. One of the things, we think about, I think about that too, a lot of ways, is Aldo Leopold. And one of the quotes that I love about Aldo, that most people don't really talk about this quote or anything, but this quote really is me. Aldo said one time, the two things that motivate him is the relationship of people to people, and then the second is the relationship of people to the land. And to me, that just resonates to me. Yeah.
Well, that, when you talk about your work, first of all, your dad's work, and then your work at the NRCS, and then at Mobil. And it seems like you really had a front row seat to a lot of different families, a lot of different businesses, and I would imagine in a lot of cases there was some struggle that came with that. And so it seems like when you talk about you're obviously very committed to conservation, to wildlife and all that, but it seems that it's that people's connection with that and kind of helping be the one that helping create systems so that that relationship can be strong between the people and the land. Is that right?
That's 100% right. I mean, stewardship requires stewards.
Yes. I think that I saw that on your website. Isn't that one of the...
that is one of our guiding principles.
Yes,
right?
I saw that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's the thing, right, is that it all comes down to us as individuals, and I think we overlook that. And that's where I guess some of my frustrations of, working for the government and state government and some of those things, it's hard to get to that point.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's not that they don't care or they don't want to, it's just the dynamics of the system.
That's one thing I've just seen over and over, and it gives me so much respect for people like you, people like Eric, people like Carlos at the Nature Conservancy that I talk to all the time, is I feel like when you get about more than 10 people, it gets real hard to control people. And so you think about something like the federal government or Amazon or Walmart, is almost by definition, it can't be flexible.
Right.
It's the exception to the rule if it is. But I feel like as you've grown TALT, you've managed to grow it, but also keep it flexible.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think the core, right, is building a team that fully understands, right? In a nonprofit world, I mean, we're working in a nonprofit world not to be millionaires, right? I mean, we have an internal calling, and it's finding the folks that understand that internal calling, and all of us having, the drive. I would say the TALT team that we've put together is is the best, hands down. And the thing that's interesting is people don't realize the sacrifices that the staff does. Like some of these grant opportunities that have been out there, the IRA funds, for example, the first round of the IRA funds for conservation easements was sort of kind of North Dakota to kind of central Texas, basically. Because, the NRCS wanted to, hey, let's pilot this. Let's kind of, figure this out as more money's coming through those funds. I mean, our staff for 2 months worked 7 days a week.
We talked about that when I saw you last.
And didn't even bat an eye. I didn't have to say, hey, guys, let's do this. They were like, hey, this is what we got ahead of us. This is what we're going to do. We're going to help all of these ranchers and farmers that have faith in us, and we're gonna go make this happen.
How do you select for that, though, as the leader, as the person who's ultimately responsible for hiring folks?
Yeah,
I mean, because it sounds real good, but the reality of doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my time of networking and being around and meeting people all the time has been very, part of a big piece of that, right? And so, and having opportunities and doing things and working with a lot of people all over the country. And so with that, a lot of times people call me and say, hey, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of something, right? Of this. I'm tired of working wherever I'm working. I just don't feel like I'm making the impact. I want to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I think we can do that, with TALT. And so a lot of times I don't post many positions.
That's the best case scenario.
Because and because people are coming and we're having those conversations. And sometimes I have to tell them, hey, be patient. We'll find you a role, but it's just like a nonprofit, right? Is you're constantly trying to raise money and trying to, build that. And so, for me, it's about impacts and outcomes. And so we get those impacts and outcomes, and then we really promote and show those across pollinate from a lot of ways, from funders to consumers to other landowners, all of that aspect, right? And so it just, and we've grown, I would say our hard part right now, we're growing faster than we could imagine.
Yep.
When I came to TALT, we had around 6 projects in the pipeline, and we're pushing 90 now. And we've taken, because of the hard work of the staff, like I mentioned, Ed, there were like 42 applications nationwide on that first IRA. We had half of them, like 21, 22.
And those applications, just for people, I mean, I don't know what getting a PhD is like, but this seems like dissertations.
Yeah, they are, as a rancher, told me once in Florida, which I've always kept in mind. He's like, you know, the NRCS, your conservation plans and things are like the Gutenberg Bible, right? He's like, I don't need the Gutenberg. I just need, like, what are the top 2 things I need to do?
Yeah.
And that's how those applications are, right? And they're very detailed and very just way overwhelming. But, you know, I can sit here and say today we got 16 funded for, you know, 28 million, right? So crazy, and you think of Texas, you know, that's our biggest pinch point. Eric, you know, I envy Eric here in Colorado of the structures, the mechanisms of funding to help in this conservation. We don't have those in Texas. You know, we have to really rely on our federal, you know, side from NRCS. And historically on their, you know, easement program, we get around $5 million annually. Our state fund has been $2 million biannually. $2 million doesn't go far when you look at the price and the value of land, right? And so, you know, so that's been our challenge.
Well, and that's, I mean, when I spent 4 years doing conservation here, conservation director, and we weren't dealing with properties the size that y'all and that Eric deals with. But just for some reference for people, I never once got federal funding. And I raised millions and millions and millions of dollars and never once got NRCS dollars. And that just shows like how different it is. And that's kind of y'all's main choice down there.
Yeah, that's our really only our biggest option. And, you know, it's having staff. You know, I've hired a number of our staff we've hired are past NRCS employees.
Do you think that, I remember when you were hired because I was paying attention, and I remember thinking your NRCS background was probably knowing how that system works, I would think is very valuable. Because for me, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I can figure stuff out. And that it is a different world.
It's a different world. Yeah. And I would say I've been away from NRCS, you know, 14, 15 years now, I guess, or let's see, 13 years, you know, so I've been away from them a while now.
But it's just this foundational
knowledge. The foundation. Yeah. And then, you know, I think it's hiring the right people. A lot of the guys, like I said, you know, have NRCS background. So they're kind of newer on the system and what's there too. And we can, you know, all sit there and strategize of how do we put the best application forward. And so, you know, that's the key. And I think it's beyond that, right? It's, you know, I would say one of my skills is, you know, I just see things differently. I see like the puzzle pieces of how to come up with solutions and, you know, how do we bring different people together, right? So how do we take an NRCS funded project that's not fully funded, right? And then how do we bring in a corporate company into and layer that?
Yeah.
How do we think about ecosystem service markets and how do we layer that from a carbon, water, biodiversity? You know, and how do we help and think about and talk to the landowner of thinking about, you know, maybe there's some value added aspects, right, of premium markets around what they're doing.
How do you think about failure? Because you're on the, you know, you're having to come up with things that haven't been done before. I mean, it's not just let's go put easement on the place. I mean, I think
if you're not failing, man, you're not doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where I tell my staff. I mean, the only time I will get upset with staff is if they're not trying something, right, and failing. And because the thing is, right, and you have to understand that we'll learn from that. You know, a lot of these things that we think of, it's not that they're not a bad idea. A lot of it's timing, right? And, you know, we kind of think about, you know, some of these things 10 years ago weren't possible, and it's just timing of everything. So, and I think especially working with families, you know, there's a suite of tools and not all the tools are the right tools, right? And conservation easement being one of those. That's our bread and butter at TALT. But again, we've kind of talked people of like, hey, you know, maybe this isn't the right thing for you.
Or and that goes back to the relationship thing.
Yeah. And we're truly, you know, sincere about it, you know, and we always tell folks when they come in is that, you know, your first big decision is if you say, hey, I want to do a conservation easement, is finding the right, you know, easement holder.
Yes.
And if that's not TALT, I mean, there's no hard feelings. I'm going to help you find and I'm going to connect you to the right organization, because to me, that's a win for us, right?
Yes.
In our mission of getting conservation on the ground and keeping working lands working. And so, you know, and I truly, truly believe that.
One question for you, you know, you came in been there, what, like 3.5 years?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Almost 4, yeah.
And you were filling very, 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 very big shoes. Blair,
huge. Yeah.
Blair Fitzsimons,
Yeah.
who is a legend. And I've been lucky enough to get to know Blair and Joe. And it's, it's amazing what she built there. And so I'd love to hear, I don't even know how you go about it. It's like showing up at Carolina. I think of stuff at UNC basketball.
Yeah.
It's like being the coach after Dean Smith.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
How do you even begin? So, like, you talked about your vision, and you talked about your old boss who had this amazing vision when he was new on the job. When you showed up at that interview and it became clear, all right, this is a real possibility I could get this job. Yeah. How do you present that? How do you present your vision?
No, that's this is great. And man, Blair, definitely a legend, someone I respect and talk to often, right? And pick her brain. Her and Joseph both. And one of the good things is, like, through my work at Mobil, is we did a lot of partnerships with TALT on some other projects and different things. So, got to know Blair and TALT. And I always kind of thought of TALT as, a position in the future for me, right? And, gets me closer to home and things of that nature. And it just came a lot quicker, I think, for me and for Blair. I think life, like, in general, she became a grandmother. There was just things that happened, like, hey, her next chapter in life, I think, hit her a little quicker than she really.
When they're serious about being grandparents, because I wanted to see Joe when I was in Texas the other week. He's like, I'm with my grandboys. Sorry.
No, and you got to. That's why I respect them, right?
Yeah,
and
it's awesome.
So
it's a great role model, I think.
Exactly, and so, and I always tell Blair, I'm like, following behind her was perfect, right? I couldn't have done what Blair did to build and start TALT in the beginning. You think about, fast forward, 18 years ago when she was starting to build TALT, man, she took a lot of arrows and a lot of heat from a lot of folks.
Different world back then.
Yeah,
about
it just it was a different world, and she had the patience and the ability to work through all of that and set the foundation. I had it pretty easy, right? It's a perfect foundation that Blair had set, and it was just me being able to do the things that she really wanted to do.
Yep.
And in her vision, she just didn't have enough time to get there.
Sure.
And so, we couldn't be where we are, or I couldn't have been successful at what I've done without all of her work. And so I think it was a good 1-2 combo, if you want to look at it that way, with her.
Well, and I'm sure she, and, as she sees what you've done in 3.5 years building on what she built, I would imagine, like, worst case scenario, it's a huge relief. Like, but then best case scenario, like, man, this is awesome. And it's one of those lagging indicators, like she I don't know all the details, but I imagine it was a grind getting that thing going, and then gets it up and then you come in and it's like the exponential curve, Right. And so that's, super
it's been super fun. And what I appreciate a lot about Blair too is when I started, she's like, look, I'm stepping back. I'm ready for this next chapter. I'm not getting in your way. I'm always a phone call away if you need anything. And she really drew the line, which I really appreciated.
Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do.
That's hard to do. And I have so much respect for her because, she built TALT. It was her baby, and her to be able to step back and really let me kind of grow and kind of figure it out on my own as well, but her still be that support. When she was a great support, and I did call her of like, explain this. Why did we do this? What do you think about this? Right. Yeah. And what's been fun too is Joseph, still part of the foundation as a key component. He's our chairman of the foundation side. And Faye, Blair's oldest daughter, and Joseph's is on the board now.
Oh, nice.
And so it's just great to see that family still part of it. Yeah. And I will say one of the coolest things that I did, and what Blair, her own personal, her dad's place and her uncle's place, I think her sisters and cousins wanted to put a conservation easement, but they wasn't timing and everything with Blair being, CEO of TALT. And so that was one of the things probably a year after she retired is that we, got to work with her of putting an easement on their family place, and just seeing that with her and her sisters and Toby, her cousin, was just really special, really special.
Well, and for people listening, I'm gonna have Blair and Joe on the podcast at some point in the future. We've been trying to make that happen for a while, but you'll get the full story there. But just super inspiring. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself or saying too much, but I really do feel like, how they talk about like the first couple of such and such. I feel like they're the first couple of conservation in Texas.
No, hands down. Yeah. I think it's a dynamic duo for sure.
Big time.
Yeah.
Another question for you about just your priorities, because I was thinking about this on my drive up. I've seen you twice in the last 12 months, and both times were at events that were mostly focused around helping the next generation kind of come up.
Right.
And I've been lucky enough to get to come down to Texas a lot recently to a lot of different conservation events. And I say, in Colorado, all the conservation events are very inspiring and fun, but it seems like the vast majority of people at the conservation events are people like me who moved here from some other place and fell in love with it and want to protect it. Whereas in Texas, I feel like everybody there is from Texas and nobody leaves. Like they might leave for a minute to go education or get a job, but they love Texas and they love they're just so committed to it that they never leave. And that's just really struck me. But then also it seems that there's these really great programs in place to build up kind of the next generation. And it seems that with everything you have going on, you spend a lot of time with this kind of mentoring the next generation. Is that something that is a priority for you? Like is that a very important part of your work?
It's extremely important. And I think a number of reasons, right? When I came in to TALT, at that time we were, 14 years old, 15 years old at the time. A lot of the easements that had been in place were starting to go over, getting really close to hand to the next generation. And I always kind of say that, if you think of an apple, there's this conservation apple, right? And the core of that apple is the family and the people.
Yes.
Right? These families took a bite of that apple and put a conservation easement. There's a bite out of the apple, right? There's less of that apple.
Yep.
And so it's really important to me that next generation, especially our easement holders, our easements that we hold now, easement donors, how do we help empower that next generation, right? One less tool. So we have to find other creative innovations. Just because it has a conservation easement doesn't mean that they're going to be able to keep it together, right? It's still a business. It's still, financial burdens and
damn
things.
hard business too.
Yeah. And so that's where really to me was thinking of too is kind of adding this additive conservation side, right? Let's start thinking about other tools of carbon markets, water markets, biodiversity, anything and everything is open. And how do we help them? And so that side was very important to me. And so that's kind of where, when you look at our age of our landowners today, we're creeping on, getting closer to 70 years of age than 60.
That's crazy.
And so we have to be thinking about that next generation. And if not, what's going to happen? And I think, this is the dilemma we're in, right? And it's another challenge, right? Because let's say we're 70 years of age and you're still making, scraping a living and you can't afford to truly retire and hand over to the next generation. That next generation had to make a living. Most operations can't support but one family. So they've either taken a job in town or, somewhere else. And so, those are some other challenges too. And that I'm trying to think of how do we be, other creativities of other innovations to find, ways for these, that generation.
What do you think when you think about the challenges? I mean, I feel like there's so many, and then there's so many that we don't even know about. Like I was just at the last time I saw you at the TIER Institute Endangered Species Act Symposium. there was a lot of talk about climate change. And I know there are certain people that get real mad when you talk about climate change, but bottom line is that, there's this uncertainty in the future about the weather and how that's going to affect the ability to do business on these lands. But then you've got, I feel like everybody's moving to Texas. You've got the fragmentation. Yeah. You've got just, there's so many different things. What do you think of there being one major threat and then one's following, or is it a bunch of threats?
It's a bunch coming out at once, right? I mean, we're gaining 1,400 people moving to the state daily.
What?
1,400. So basically 500,000 a year.
Damn.
Right? So you start adding that and this nexus of our land fragmentation, those pressures. We're losing close to 1,000 acres a day of our working lands being changed to development, other things, right? So this nexus of that is crazy, right? And then I think you add this other layer of, we have 1% of the population are actually landowners and working on the land. There's this kind of a disconnect. And so understanding that land is so important and the land stewardship and all those public benefits of where's your water come from, right? I think of LBJ's quote, soil and water conservation starts where the first raindrop falls, right? And especially if you put that in context of Texas where, we're 85% privately owned state.
That's crazy,
right? That water is falling on a land stewards and how they steward that land. So, all of these things are challenges. And I think that's the hardest challenge is how do we tell the story and how do we educate folks outside our peer influence, right? We always want to talk to ourselves and we do a really good job at that. But how do we really start articulating? And that's to me one of our biggest challenges, and one of mine from TALT is how do we raise money to help with campaigning, right? To help with that. Blair started a campaign that I think really made an impact, and I'm wanting to kind of pick it back up. Is no land, no water. And we think about what's coming in the future of this nexus ed of the population increase and water is definitely going to be our biggest challenge.
Sure.
We saw this last summer, one of the worst summers. I don't ever want to experience that again, what we just had. But we had towns of Kyle, kind of in between San Antonio and Austin, that basically had run out of water by August, and we're having to buy water from other towns.
Wow.
And this is a town that's one of the, largest growing towns in the nation, and there's still a lot of growth to come, and they don't even have enough water to support their population today. So what are we going to do, right? And so those, to me, that's the challenge. And I think I start by kind of telling our story, and I kind of mentioned this earlier. It's about impacts and outcomes. At TALT, we've helped empower 48 families. And I'm very proud of that number, right? Of keeping that legacy and heritage together. Those 48 families, 300,000 acres scattered across the state, through their land stewardship in 1 year, are providing enough drinking water for the state for 12 years.
Oh, wow. That's perfect storytelling.
And San Antonio, right? The 7th largest city in the U.S., where our office is enough drinking water for 200 years for that population right there. That's our disconnect, right? We don't understand where our water comes from. We don't understand the importance of that stewardship. And thinking about that land is important. Land is providing, not only for the family's operation, but for all Texans. And so that's the thing for me is just telling our story a little different. And, the staff is totally tired of me saying, hey, those days we talk about how many acres we have under easement, those days are over. We need to talk about the impacts of those acres and what those acres are providing.
Y'all do a great job with your marketing because I get your emails and your website's great, but I feel like you hit the balance. You make it very clear the seriousness of the issue, but then that's balanced out with inspiration and stuff that'll make you feel good about families because in my experience, and I think a lot about this, there's so many like media outlets that focus on environmental issues, and I'm on their team. I want to learn, but I can't read the shit because it's so depressing and it's just inflammatory and angry. And I'm kind of like, who are they speaking to if I don't want to read this? And I'm not saying I'm right, but I feel like in your work, you need to be very clear to who you're speaking to. You got to be, but then you got to, what is it, like widen the tent? Is that the term?
Yeah, right.
You got to get new people in.
Right.
And it's got to be inspiring or alarming in the type of way that's going to make people pay attention without talking down to them or being accusatory to them. You know what I mean?
No, I think that's exactly right. And we try. I mean, we think a lot through that, and we try to do it in quick little blurbs, and that's hard, right? 'Cause,
it is hard.
And visual, I think most people are visual learners and understanding that. I mean, one of the visuals that I love to use is, talking about the population growth and understanding that. So I'll use a map of the U.S., and then I'll have like the 15 counties of Dallas-Fort Worth area kind of in blue and highlighted kind of up there in that north central Texas. And there's more people in that Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex in those around 15 counties than there are individually 37 states. And I'll have those states kind of colored in red of which states. And when you see that, if you don't have the oh shit moment, then we're not going to change.
Yeah,
right?
they're not.
But when you see that, it's like, oh man, and that's increasing. So we do have these pressures. We do need to think of ways, and so I mean, but it's hard, right? And it's hard to be. I find these creative times for me where I get creative and I think through things like that of, hey, if we could do this, we could, really tell a story. And then I'll get in these lulls, and it's kind of like, where's the creativity? And, and then it'll kind of come, it kind of comes and goes. And I wish it was
the conservation
more,
use.
I wish it was, more often than it is, but those little things are important.
Oh yeah. Well, speaking of important, as a leader, how do you prioritize what you're going to direct all these resources at? Because I mean, it seems like, from a negative standpoint, a negative analogy, it's like the whole neighborhood's on fire. Mm-hmm. And how do we decide which houses we're going to save? I don't mean that. I don't mean to be negative, but you could go in a million directions. Yep. And you've shown that you can raise the money to kind of figure out where you want to go. And so I don't know how do you do it, or is there a process you go through? I mean, do you lean on your other colleagues from other agricultural land trusts and talk through ideas? I mean, like, how do you get to the point where you're like, all right, all of our attention or a big portion of our attention is going to go towards this for the next however many months?
That's a good, it's a tough question, right? In a lot of ways, and it's tough to maneuver through. And I'll let me step back a little. TALT and Blair and the founding board put together these kind of guiding principles.
I love those,
right?
By the way. Yeah.
And those guiding principles, we stay true to those, right? And it keeps us grounded. It keeps that mission creep for us. Mm-hmm. And one of those guiding principles, Ed, was that we won't target an area, right? And so, we're state-based. We're here, and really when you look at TALT, we're really one of the few, we're the only land trust that's ag focused, working lands focused, and statewide.
Yep.
And so for us, we want to help any family wherever those families are, and wherever that land, right? Every acre counts, and every acre matters. A lot of our other counterparts in land trust are very watershed focused or county based focused, and which is great. That's their mission and where they're going. And so we try to maneuver it in a lot of ways. And so, but when we think about funding opportunities, it's harder to say, hey, from, El Paso to Beaumont, Texas,
sure.
Here's the suite of where we want the money. But what we do is just engage with a lot of producers, right? I mean, that's our people. And so when we start finding a lot of these landowners that are within a community that are all saying, hey, raising my hand. I really need this. I really want this. I think this is the right tool for us, but I need the funding to make it happen. That's when we start saying, okay, we're really not targeting, because these landowners have come to us and multiple, and this is kind of the avenue and the way we need to do it. So the first one we did, we worked with Borderland Research Institute out in Alpine, and we got a regional conservation partnership program from them. They were the lead. We got roughly about $6 million to do habitat work.
That's RCCP?
RCPP.
RCPP.
Yeah. Regional Conservation Partnership Program through NRCS.
That was the application that about killed me.
It's rough.
And it was very quickly rejected.
It's rough. But working with Dr. Harvison and we ended up receiving that one. We were kind of secondary. We had a little bit of money to help with the conservation easement, one easement. We're working on that easement. Then the next one we put together was our first, that was TALT's, kind of the lead, was our kind of the Oasis watershed. So Uvalde kind of to Corpus Christi.
Yep.
We had, we probably have 25 landowners that are like, hey, we need this, over 100,000 acres. And so we ended up receiving around 8 million. And then this last round of our CPP, we had the same kind of thing in the Goliad, Victoria, Refugio Prairie, kind of that coastal prairie area, which is really important from a conservation of the Atwater prairie chicken and, endangered species and many things. There, we ended up getting 25 million just on that project, right? And what I'm excited about that project is, we're going to try some new things in Texas that we've never done before. We've seen other states of Wyoming and others, is that we're going to do probably about 19 million or so to perpetual easements. And then we're going to do about 5 million or so to sort of I'm going to call a habitat lease, kind of a short-term, kind of 10-year agreement to help those families that were, perpetual isn't quite there, they're not quite there, or it's not the right tool, but we can help them, with this kind of habitat lease approach. So we're pretty excited, right? It's going to, we're not going to, not biting too much. It's not too much money, hopefully, but it'll kind of help build a new tool in our toolbox that we can leverage and find other funding in the future to try something new that's going to help families. And so I'm excited about that. We've been very fortunate in the last 18 months of, some of these fundings from the federal, we've probably brought in around $80 million, which is spectacular. That's right?
A lot of money.
The challenge that we have for TALT, and I'll be completely honest, right? That 80 million, 90+% of that is going straight back to the landowner, right? It's not helping keep the lights on, so now it's, my challenge is how do we go raise other money to help keep us going? Now we have to deliver, we're going to need more staff. We're going to need more things from that side. So there's, it's, good in one hand and, scary in the other. But I no doubt for us, we're going to roll our sleeves up. We'll make it happen. We're not going to let the landowners down. But it is a challenge. And I think, it comes back to, and I'm sorry, kind of going this long loop back to your original question about, how do you prioritize? One of my biggest conversations is with a lot of foundations right now, really? Right? Because the foundations, they want projects, they want to see things. And I'm like, look, if you want a ROI, help invest in TALT. Help us deliver this other money that we have. That should be your priority, right? In your target area.
Yep.
And it's just hard to kind of get that through of just dynamics of, culture and system. And then you have some other foundations that totally get it and understand it. And so those are our challenges that we have ahead of us.
Yeah, I feel like in my limited experience, a lot of foundations understandably want to be able to brag about what their money did and innovation, exciting projects, all that kind of stuff. But there's something so welcome when they're like, here's some money, do whatever you want with it. Yeah. Pay the bills, put gas in the car, the company car, whatever. I had no idea about that until I was in the trenches, and you realize how valuable that money is. Yeah. Are you, would you consider yourself patient or impatient? I can't tell.
Oh, that's a good question. Kind of a funny story about that. And something that I think is true, and that opened my eyes a number of years ago. It's probably 20 years ago. I was sitting at our bunkhouse, in Lone. It was my brother-in-law and my wife and I, and we're sitting there talking, and my brother-in-law has been around since I was 3, right? So he's known me my whole life, and we're sitting there talking, and the 3 of us got about this question, right? Are you patient and impatient? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm patient, And they both looked at me, and my brother-in-law was like, Chadro, I hate to tell you, you're not patient, right? And so it was it was really, I sit back, think about it. I was like, I was hurt, like, man, what do you mean? And it was sort of this slap in the face, but I would really say that really helped me tremendous, right? Because it helped me really understand myself better. And I would say, you fast forward kind of a number of years after that, I really got into Myers-Briggs and personality.
What are you?
What do you think I am?
I have no idea. ESTJ.
So I'm a ISTP. Or
50%.
Yeah.
You're I'm
an introvert.
I am too.
Right.
I'm ISTJ.
But I'm able to, I know how to flip on the switch, right?
Okay.
But I'm drained like you are.
Okay.
Like you and I've talked about, and a lot of people would think you're not an introvert either, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Professional
So I'm the same.
Talker.
Yeah. So I'm the same way. I'm a IT or thinker. What's important to me, right? And we train our staff is to understand the personalities and understand how to speed read people. Because this is the thing, right? It comes back to people. And we all take information and want to take information differently. And I think that's where we fell in, say, a lot of state agencies and a lot of things of that nature. We take the same approach with every landowner that comes in the door.
Yeah, you can't do that.
And you can't do that. Yeah. And so what we try to do is kind of understand those things, do our best to understand that personality, and deliver information that's best fits that landowner
in the way
and
that
then
they need it.
More importantly, what's the right personality of the staff that would make the wind better, right? It shouldn't always be Ed.
Yeah.
Maybe Chad is, a better fit for that, that landowner. And so we try to do that the best we can. And it's, it's hard just because of resources and number of staff and things of that nature. But those approaches are really important. I kind of started that really and dove a lot of that in when I was at Noble. And, one of our staff, Brenna Gayak, is certified Myers-Briggs. And,
that's so smart that you do that.
So it's those little things like that I would say other conservation organizations,
I think people consider that stuff a luxury, and it's not a luxury.
No.
It's
part of business.
Here's another version of that I found I love all that personality stuff. And there's one called the Enneagram. And it puts you into one of 9 categories.
Okay.
And I really credit the Enneagram, me getting my results of making me stop doing real estate and do conservation.
Right.
Because I realized that how my personality is, but it shows like at your best how you are and at your worst how you are. And at my worst characteristics, they all were my daily characteristics in the real estate business, and my best characteristics were all the characteristics I brought to conservation work that like people like Eric were nice enough to bring me in for.
Right.
And I realized it kind of snapped me out of it and like, all right, I probably should use my energy more wisely. But I think that's so cool.
Yeah, I think those things are crucial. I think another one that I think is very interesting is generational learning, how different generations learn as well. So I think it's the combination of how you layer those, and it becomes, sort of a art. There's science to all of that, but there's also an art and of how to, intertwine those tools to better engage.
Well, and it goes, everything you're saying across the board, all of it, like if you think of it as a funnel, it all goes back to how do we build stronger relationships?
Well, it's all about relationships.
That's
100%.
it. And every
100%.
Successful person I've had on here that brings real value to the conservation world, that's what it is. Over and over and over. There's no exceptions.
Yeah.
Because think if somehow, even in NRCS days, if you were the valedictorian, summa cum laude, PhD expert in wildlife biology, but you're an asshole, that ain't gonna do you any good.
Yeah.
It's gonna do you no good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's all about relationships and building those relationships. And, I've been very fortunate, worked all over the country. And, I can truly say that there, I could pick up a phone in just about any state and call somebody if I needed help. And, get Christmas cards from all over, right? I mean, those times are very important to me. And when I've left and moved, throughout my career, those are the things that came down to it is, those relationships I truly appreciate. And I think, when my time is done in this world, that's going to be, to me, that's where the wealth is.
That's what matters.
That's what matters is the relationships, and not just the relationships, but just the impactful, right, of relationships, of being, I know that I've helped empower them and vice versa. They've helped me, and it's the give and take, right? It's just like a marriage in a way. It's not a 50-50 kind of split. And I think, that's the other side of this.
I think that's the other thing worth noting, at least in my experience, is there's no shortcut. There's no fast way to build these relationships. I mean, It takes over and over time and year after year after year.
And you got to understand, it only takes one shit to wipe out all those attaboys.
That was my next thing I was going to say.
And so it's really important that, I taught a course for NRCS for many, many years, a week-long course called Working Effectively with Livestock Producers.
Oh, wow. And
so we went in and started off with Myers-Briggs and understanding how do you work, with these people. And one of the pieces, I always tell them is don't try to fake it, right?
Yes.
And you get a lot of people that, want to, fake it or give an answer. And it's like, don't. Say, hey, I'll go find the answer and get back to you. And I remember, a mentor and a good friend of mine, a producer, one of the best range managers, producers in the country, hands down, is Frank Price. And he's kind of west of San Angelo. And I remember going the very first time with him and me, pretty quick out of college, asking me questions, just trying to test me, right?
Sure.
And I was like, I'd answer. I'm like, I know this guy knows this, and just kind of keep going. And one of the things that, kind of comes back to the relationships is, he kind of got really back into prescribed burning and things like that. And we really started, hitting it off on that. And I told Frank one time, I was like, we need to go on a road trip. Mm-hmm. Just you and I, let's get in the truck and let's go look at these places. And, I worked at the Kerr Wildlife Management area and we had lots of research and burning. And so we went there and started off there and hit a bunch of different landowners that I knew that had some burning and history to go see that. And, I kind of years later, I'd kind of forgotten about that road trip, right? It was like a 2-day road trip, which was a lot of, windshield time. And Frank got an award many years later of kind of a range management stewardship award through Society for Range Management. Yeah. And he brought up that story and it was like, I'd forgotten all about that. And he was talking about, how impactful that was. Right. And to me, that's what it's about.
I agree. I completely agree. I've always kind of knew it, but it wasn't until I did get involved in the conservation world that I really, the combination of relationships and working towards common goals, like is huge. 2 more questions for you. One, any good book recommendations? Any books I should read? Any books that have been impactful? Think Like a Horse.
Think Like a Horse. Have you read this one?
No, I have not. By the owner of the Diamond Cross Ranch.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
I've not even seen that.
You got to read this one.
Okay. Think Like a Horse by Grant Collier. All right.
So it's a good one. That's kind of one I've been reading now. Actually interesting. I kind of was given a talk and do a talk quite a bit with JP Morgan. Mm-hmm. And they gave this to me and kind of reading this. And this was one of their top suggested books. Great book. And what I love about the book is just the title. Start off with the title, Think Like a Horse.
Yep.
Right. And so my mind is being an Aldo Leopold guy is, I think like a mountain. I think of Aldo, right? And that's really important to me. And that's kind of how I drive really a lot of our business and thought process, right? Is thinking holistically and, being that mountain and understanding the wolf and the place for the wolf and the importance of the wolf and all of everything around it. And so when I just read that title, right, I think of that, Think Like a Mountain component. And the book's really good of leadership and thinking of life lessons of just training horses and how it relates to every day. So definitely, I'm actually gonna give you this book so you take it with you.
Oh, really?
So you don't have to. Yeah.
Awesome.
So
thank you.
It's
hell yeah, free books.
Yeah.
Thanks. I've never seen that, but it looks really cool. And then I'm familiar with the Diamond Cross Ranch too. All right. Last question. Y'all, for people listening, you need to understand how busy this fella here is. I don't think he sleeps. There's a competition between him and Eric as to who works harder and more efficiently. But we got to wrap this thing up. But last, any words of advice? Any way you want to wrap it up? Anything you like to ask of the people? Any foundations from Texas that want to give a whole lot of money to do that? Any final words?
That's a good question. I mean, I think my thing is just, I love what I do. Right?
It's very evident.
And passion, I think I just ask people to find their passion and lead with passion, whatever that may be. And, I was very fortunate, I think, of finding my passion young, but I was open-minded enough to take new challenges kind of through that journey. I never imagined myself at 18 years old, right, or where I would be today. Or, another friend of mine, we've talked about both of us kind of being in New York City and the finance, and this conservation, like we're lost. And why are we, why are we sitting in these boardrooms and things of that nature? And, you find yourself in different places and I always tell, people that to follow it and, God's good and he'll lead you into the right path. And I always kind of wonder, I think of my dad too. He's 84 and he's always he always says, he's trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. And I kind of feel like I'm going to be the same way. I'll be just like him. And, retirement is not a thing, right? I would die right away of that. Awful. Yeah. And so, I kind of keep what's next, right? And what more can we do? And more importantly, it's about the relationships and it's the collaborations of, who are the right people to bring in the room to take on the next challenge and find those solutions. So,
well, man, I love talking to you. Every conversation, I love it. And I'm glad I get to hang out with you more tomorrow. I appreciate getting to come see what y'all are up to. But super fun, man. I'm just a huge fan. And
we have to do it again.
Let's do it.
We didn't even cover like anything.
No, I mean, we could have. This was just the warm up. And I want to come to Texas and do one of those road trips with you. So we'll do that. But thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.